I'm super thrilled to be here with this amazing panel. I'm going to start introducing, we have Haley Lickstein, who has been a advocate for political engagement in young people for a while. She has a very amazing background in politics already at a young age, including internships with the US Senate, roles at Emily's List, the Democratic National Committee, and has been participating in various campaigns. She uses her social media platform to really bridge the gap between civic engagement and participation in our system. We have Sam Schwartz here, who is the founder and executive director of the Tour to Save Democracy. He lost his cousin Alex in the Parkland shooting, has staged week-long sit-ins in the Capitol building to demand stronger gun safety laws, has toured the country with Change the Ref from July to August of 23, stopped in 26 cities where mass shootings have occurred to spread awareness of gun violence. And he just said he's just back at school in his dorm room right now, coming to you live. And then Olivia Julianna, who is also an activist, abortion rights advocate. She is from Texas. She was formerly director of politics and government affairs for Gen Z for Change, and she is huge on social media. Girl travels all the time too. She was named one of the 50 most influential people of 2022 by Bloomberg Media. And I know a lot of us started following Olivia when she and Matt Gaetz had a little exchange on social media, and she ended up raising millions of dollars for abortion funds. So thank you all so much for being here. I really, really appreciate that. Haley, I'm going to start with you, and we'll kind of just work our way around. I would love for you all to just kind of tell us a little bit more than what I said about your work and, in general, just like, what are you hearing from young voters now as you go out and talk to people and online as well?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. As Julie said, I'm a civic influencer and activist focused on mobilizing young people to use their voice, feel empowered, and use social media as a tool for digital advocacy and activism, specifically focusing on women's issues, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and getting out the vote this November. And I'm really hearing young people be excited in ways I haven't in a long time. It's been so energizing to be out there the last 2 months and see the energy shift and young people starting to really want to get engaged, not just at the top of the ticket, but all the way down ballot, really beginning to understand and lean into the power of their local politics and local community.
That's great to hear. I love that. Sam, we'll go to you if you want to tell us anything more about your background, what you're involved with, what you're hearing on the ground.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I want to reiterate what Haley said. Thank you for having us. I think Red, White, and Blue is one of the most incredible groups, most effective groups out there. So thank you for all that you do. And secondly, I'm again going to reiterate what Haley is saying, that young people, I have never seen young people be this excited about A, politics, but B, a political candidate. And that candidate is Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. The excitement is through the roof. In levels that I've never seen. And if you heard Julie's introduction, you know why I got into this. It was because of a tragedy. My cousin Alex was killed in the Parkland shooting. I've been surrounded by politics from that moment on it's almost 7 years now. So I've seen the inaction on the Republican side on, yes, gun violence prevention, but abortion rights and climate reform and housing and all of this stuff that's so important to young people. And when we look at the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, that's the biggest difference to me. And I think that's a big reason why young people are so excited, is because Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are really championing all of those things in their speeches. When they do media interviews, they're just so relatable. It's so exciting. And I think that's really the core difference here as we move forward, as we go to the sprint to the finish line here. That's really the biggest difference.
Thanks so much, Sam. Olivia? Same question to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I am a junior at the University of Houston, Victoria, so I am also in school right now in the midst of this election season. And I'm also working on the U.S. Senate race here in Texas. We have a fantastic candidate named Colin Allred who is running against Ted Cruz. And the polls have us statistically tied right now, so this is a huge pickup opportunity for Democrats. But when I would talk to young people on the ground, I was actually just in Waco, Texas. And if you don't know where Waco, Texas is, it is a very conservative place outside of Dallas. It's where Baylor University is. And I met with young people there, and they're excited and they are organizing there on Baylor's college campus. And this is somewhere where it is extremely conservative. Not necessarily the most welcoming place to members of the LGBTQ plus community or Democrats in general. And even the young people there are being very unapologetic about their views. They're being very outward about them. They're doing a lot of peer-to-peer organizing. And I think a big part of that is, number one, people are just so excited about Kamala Harris and how she represents a new generation of leadership in the White House. But number two, because of the fact that her and Tim Walz, not just do they have the good policy that a lot of young people support, but they also have, as Tim Walz likes to say, they brought back the joy. You know, they make it happy and energetic to not just be a Democrat, but we're reclaiming the idea of being happy and energetic to be an American. And I've just seen so much hope and enthusiasm from young people in these last few months that I have not seen in the entire 4 years that I have been doing this. So just very, very excited to be able to organize in this moment.
Okay, this isn't a question I gave to you all, but I have to ask it because it just seems like appropriate. So all this enthusiasm, and what does the Taylor Swift endorsement mean? Is that at all an influence or not? We see all these things about people going and clicking the link and checking out, vote.gov or vote.org, whichever one it was. I was just curious what you guys thought of that and what impact that actually had. Because sometimes her demo can skew, obviously, of not voting age, right? But there's young girls that follow her. I was just curious. Had to throw that in there.
Can't see my Taylor Swift wall because that is in my living room, but as the resident Swiftie here, it does make a big difference because Taylor Swift is very protective of her brand and her image, and she doesn't like to wade into things that are controversial. So for her to use her just ginormous platform, which by the way, like her Eras tour literally changed the American economy. Like there have been studies that have been done that showed her tour alone stimulated the entire country's economy. But it makes a huge difference because there are so many young people who look up to her, who might be like, okay, maybe I should sit out this election, but they value what she has to say as a woman and as a feminist. But also, a lot of young people might just forget that we have an election coming up. Like they don't know what the dates are. They don't know how they need to register to vote in their state. So the fact that her link alone, 350,000 people clicked that link, and we know how important the metrics are in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, North Carolina. And if just 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 young people in each of those states used her link to register to vote, that could change the outcome of the election. So it is a huge, huge deal that she actually came out and endorsed Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Okay, thank you. That was actually a great answer. That was amazing. And you're right, the margins are so small. Sam, let me ask you this, because I have adult children. So, I'm not even talking, to kids every single day because they're all out of the house. What issues are top of mind for younger voters? We all think, I think as the moms and the grandparents, that we know that. I'm not sure we do. So I would really like to hear, like, what are people talking about? What are the issues that are top of mind for the people that you interact with?
Yeah, so I want to expand on what I did this summer, which I think is really important to describe the answer to this question, which along with a lot of other Gen Zers, Haley was there. We went on a tour, a month-long tour. We stopped in 15 currently Republican districts across the country. Our goal was to, get out enthusiasm among our Gen Z peers and try to flip these seats blue. And so we were hearing from young people the entire summer. We started when President Biden was the candidate, and we ended when Kamala Harris was the candidate. So we saw the entire range of enthusiasm. So not only has there been a massive enthusiasm bump, but we really saw the issues that are driving these people out to our events. And I really do think it's simple. It's gun violence, right? A lot of these kids, all of them, have grown up practically their entire lives hiding under their desks, hiding in closets, going under countless lockdown code red drills. So that's a huge, huge driving force for young people. Another issue is abortion rights. When polled, young people consistently are saying that issue overwhelmingly is important to them. It's climate reform. It's the economy. Young people want to know that their futures are being looked at, that they're going to be able to get a job after college, that college is going to be affordable. Student loan relief. And this administration has relieved, I think, close to $170 billion in student debt. These are all things that young people really, really care about. And so that, like, we had a vision board at all of our events. And so we would encourage young people to go and write their names and why they're excited about voting, or why they're voting in general, all of those things. And I didn't even mention LGBTQ plus rights, transgender rights, which is huge. And if you've read even a little bit of what Republicans have to say on that issue in Prior to 2025, it literally just flat out says we want to remove the discrimination, that we want to remove that you can't discriminate against LGBTQ people, which is just ridiculous that they're saying it, right? I mean, we know they want to do it, but now they're saying it in black and white, which is incredibly scary. So those are the things that are important to young people in this election.
Haley, anything you want to add to that? And I'm also curious whether you think they are putting it right out there, and do they just not think that young people are paying attention to that? Because are they really just trying to scare the older generation and ignoring the fact that most of you are much more open? That's not it. That's not something that's going to scare you off. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Well, I think that young people are lived and grew up in an era of social activism and digital transparency that's never existed before. And so I think policy members or policymakers of an older generation don't think young people are as tuned in, because in past generations they haven't been. Gen Z is the most civically engaged generation we've ever seen and the most educated generation we've seen. And so they're paying attention, and just because they're not paying attention to traditional news sources doesn't mean they're not tuned into the issues that matter most to them. And then the only thing I would add to what Sam said, I think he put it really well and sort of encompassed a lot of the issues I hear young people talk about, is that our generation's experience with these issues have been personal in a different way. I mean, we live through gun violence every day. We've seen the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We've lived through the legalization of LGBTQ marriages, and then also now the conversation to remove them. And so it feels deeply personal to our childhood, our like existence, and like we were seeing the country move in a direction that felt really exciting to us, and now watching it move backwards in a lot of people's, in Gen Z's first election they're capable of voting in.
Anything you want to add, Olivia?
Yes, I do. It's almost ironic that as someone who got into the political space a lot through abortion activism, that I actually say that that is not the most important issue to young voters. The number one most important issue to young voters is the economy. It is the economy. It is that they are going to be able to get a house, that they are going to be able to get a job, that they're going to be able to get a job that pays them a fair and livable wage. And I am actually really glad to be able to talk to this group specifically tonight, because the single most important, and Sam, you're gonna laugh at this because you know if Micah was here, he would love to hear me say this. The single most important issue for young people that Kamala Harris has proposed thus far is to build more housing. And this is most important, I think, for this group of people, is because a lot of older millennials, Gen X, boomers, the silent generation, they have these very strongly held beliefs about what neighborhoods and communities should look like in the United States. And part of that is that they want to keep neighborhoods with these lots, single family homes. And what that does is it makes it harder for developers to build affordable and missing middle housing. So these are apartment complexes, these are duplexes, triplexes, and there is this idea that if we build these things in our neighborhood, it's going to look less attractive, or it's going to bring in undesirables into the community. The undesirables are us. It is college students, it is people who are just graduating, who are trying to start their families. And the more housing we build, as Kamala Harris has proposed this, the more housing we build, the cost of housing will go down. So we need to build, baby, build. We need to build as much housing as possible. And that's why you see a lot more young people are really starting to get energized around this issue, is because we do want to be able to afford a home in the long run. But me coming out of college, 21, 22 years old, I'm not going to be able to go and afford a $400,000 home on a large lot here in Houston. We need to be working at a local level to pass permitting reform and regulatory reform, which is what Kamala Harris has been pushing for. And that is, in my opinion, the single most important issue for young voters, whether they know it or not, because the housing is the policy in this country that affects everyone. Every single person is affected by housing policy.
Okay, let me ask this question, and I'm going to try to kind of go with the flow here. So we know what issues are top of mind. What we often hear is that young people are disengaged from politics, or that they don't think their vote counts, or they're sick of both parties. How are you hearing that? And then how are you approaching conversations with your peers and trying to influence them and make them understand why their vote is so important? Haley, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not shocking that there are young people who feel really disillusioned by our government system and don't have trust in it. Look at what's happened at the Supreme Court, the conversation around ethics code violations, look at the Trump presidency and everything that transpired underneath it. It's hard for people to believe that politics can work for them. But I often say, and I've heard other people on this call say it, if you don't do politics, politics will always do you. And having a conversation with friends about identifying, okay, what are the issues that matter to you in your life, and helping to explain how even on the most local level, not voting in every single election, local election, is going to make those issues only worse for you. And like the value of your voice does go a long way. But I actually think another tool that is incredibly effective in this area is something that the people on this call can be doing, which is the intergenerational conversations. I think Gen Z and millennials, we're really used to sort of the instant gratification that comes with being constantly online and being able to get everything sort of in the instant moment. But that's not how activism works. Activism is really a long-term game. And so it's hard for young people to see the power of like the work that they're doing in activism and the way that it can actually make a difference. So hearing from our parents, our grandparents about the work that they've been doing and how they see positive changes reflected for us now in our life and how we can then do that for our children is really helpful to hear and conversations to have, because activism is that long game and we aren't able to see the changes overnight.
Thank you. Sam, same question for you then too. Like, how are you, I know that there are people who are upset with the Biden administration and what Kamala Harris has done with the Biden administration on a multitude of topics. And so a lot of kids, I don't say kids, I'm sorry, but young people, are disengaging, just don't think their vote counts. Like, how do you approach those conversations?
Yeah, I think there's a big stigma around getting involved politically within my generation. I think with every young generation of the time, there is that sort of stigma. It's not really cool to be involved in politics. It's seen as kind of nerdy, right? But for me, it was not. I didn't have a choice, right? It was kind of forced upon me. And I think that's the case for a lot of young people. So really, it just takes, I guess, brave, confident people to go out there and say to their friends, like, it doesn't have to be this negative, weird thing. Like this affects, as Haley said, if you don't do politics, politics does you. And that really is just an analogy for the fact that, look at what's happening with gun violence. The bullets don't discriminate, right? Look at what's happening with abortion rights. Look at what's happening with climate reform. Like, we're set to inherit this planet. And if we all don't do something, we're gonna really mess up our future. So there's a big stigma around it. I think talking about intergenerational change is probably one of the most single important things that we can do, is have grandparents have these sorts of conversations with their grandchildren. A lot of times young people will just tune out everything their parents are saying. But for me, when my grandma says something to me, like, I listen. Like, it's not a debate. I listen. And I'm just imagining, like, how the conversation that a grandparent could have with their grandchild is, in my opinion, one of the most important things, right? It's just about finding that issue that relates to that young person. And I think a lot of times, I think saying just, oh my God, Project 2025 is so scary is not the most effective thing we can be saying, even though it is. And of course, it's terrifying. I think actually just trying to relate whatever the political issue is to their personal lives is going to be the most effective thing. For example, LGBTQ plus rights. Like every single young person probably in the country has an LGBTQ plus friend or a transgender friend. I would suggest telling them how Republicans want to ban gender affirming care. Tell them, list out right in Project 2025 what I mentioned earlier, that it would strip away protections for discrimination on LGBTQ plus people. I think that, again, the code red drills are something that young people really, that's a real thing that a lot of young people have experience with. So I would suggest to anybody who has a grandchild on this call, just start off by asking them. A great way to start this conversation is by saying, like, hey, what do you think of Kamala Harris? Did you watch the debate? Have you seen what Donald Trump said recently? And then you can kind of go from there. But it's all about having young people hear about politics from people they trust in their lives. And a lot of time that is not the media. A lot of time that's not news. I think they just inherently tune out politics. So it's really great if it can come from somebody like you who they know and trust and love.
Olivia, I'll give you the chance to give your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think Sam is absolutely right, and Haley as well, about intergenerational organizing. Something that is really well practiced in the abortion advocacy space is storytelling, because people's personal experience is one of the most effective ways to get someone to listen to you. So, like, when it comes to those kinds of intergenerational conversations, it really can be, what was it like before this thing happened? What was it like when you were a kid? I know for me growing up, my dad was born in 1968, and in his small town in rural Texas, my dad taught me that when he was a kid, even in the 70s, that there were still issues with segregation in the town that he grew up in, even after the Civil Rights Act had been passed. And so that was a very important moment for me in my dad's relationship, is understanding, these issues are just a generation away, and the rights that we won then could just as easily be taken away now. And I think another really big part of it is getting young people to understand why some of the good things that happened in this country, why they do exist. So, for example, last week I helped organize a roundtable at the University of Houston with student leaders and Colin Allred, who's running against Ted Cruz. And one of the girls who came to this event hadn't even planned to come. She said, I'm not involved in politics. I don't vote. I think I'm registered. I'm not 100% sure. And she said, I'm not really interested in it. And so I asked her, I said, okay. I said, let me ask you a question. Are you on your parents' health insurance? She said, yeah. I said, how old are you? She said, I'm 22. I said, yeah. So, when you turn 26, you're going to have to get on your own health insurance, right? And she said, yeah, that's right. It is when I'm 26. I said, did you know that if the Affordable Care Act hadn't passed when you turned 18, when you graduated high school, you would have had to find your own health insurance? She said, I didn't know that. And then we started talking about it. And now that girl, we checked and made sure she is registered to vote here in Texas, and she has a plan for what she's going to do in November. And so I think it's educating your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and your nephews about what the positive differences that have been made, where they're coming from. And I think a lot of young people, we kind of see these results happen, but we don't know that's happening. Like for me, for example, I got a Pell Grant my freshman year of college, an extra Pell Grant than what I was supposed to get, covered my entire freshman year of college. I am engaged enough to know the reason why I got that Pell Grant is because of the American Rescue Plan. That was passed by Democrats. There are millions and millions of students out there just like me who in 2020, 2021, we got extra tuition assistance from the federal government, and they might not understand where that money came from. And it came from Democrats passing that legislation. So I think that telling the stories of your life experiences, telling your kids like where good things came from. And then the final piece of advice I would say, aside from obviously directing them to other young people who, make this look cool or whatever, is when you're going to talk to your kids, Go to them with ears to listen, not ears to hear. A lot of times when parents try to have conversations with their kids, they do it in a very aggressive, assertive way. When you're talking about politics, it is not about getting them to listen to you. It is about you listening to them and being receptive of what it is they're saying and what issues they care about, because not every single young person cares about the same thing. And then I think, yeah, I think that's it. And also, I saw someone say this in the chat earlier, and I really want to echo this. Start talking to your kids as early as possible about politics. My niece and nephew are 7 years old and 9 years old. I have taken them to block walks with me. I have taken them to Canvas. When I was a kid, my dad took me to vote with him. And if we are going to counteract these Republican attacks that we've seen against education, against democracy, against civics in the last several years, we have to start educating the next generation of voters now, and not having those conversations with them when they're turning 17, 18, 19 years old, because by then it's harder to have those conversations.
I want to focus in on the parents and the grandparents, because Sam, you kind of said something and I want to just expand upon it. By the way, Olivia, I was also born in 1968, so shout out to your dad. But you said something about parents, and sometimes kids shut their parents out, grandparents maybe a little more open to. So I see Haley shaking her head as well. Is there an approach? I like what Olivia just said about coming to listen. Is there an approach that's different with parents versus grandparents?
I can jump in. I think big misconception about Gen Z and millennials is the fact that they're like tuned out to politics or not interested, because we don't rally behind candidates or individual people the same way that maybe past generations have. We're very values based. And so I think an issue based. And so I think for parents, when approaching conversations, my recommendation and things I've seen be really successful is having conversations about topics rather than political parties or political candidates, but like, let's talk about sustainability or the environment and like why recycling is important to you. Or I mean, that's a very like base level conversation in our topic, but when you're talking about issues or values that your children may hold, the conversation might feel less loaded and might feel less from a place of parental pressure to go vote, go get involved, or support a candidate we might not agree with you on. But rather can have a conversation around like how this impacts our day-to-day life, our future, why we care about something, and you can share those perspectives with us. And young people really, really care. I mean, when you look at like Gen Z's purchasing decisions, I mean, like money talks and put your money where your mouth is. Gen Z is like 73% of Gen Z is likely to spend more money on a product that's built ethically and things like that. Like we care about the values, we care about the issues that matter to us. And so approaching conversations that way feels less politically charged and more of a conversation.
Sam, thoughts on that? Since you kind of raised the grandparent parent thing, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can't agree more with what Haley was saying. It for young people, it really is all about the issues. It's less about the candidates. This whole thing with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is a big deviation from what it usually is, which is you hear a political candidate and they could care less, or they couldn't care less. I think having these types of conversations about the issues is the best thing you could possibly do. I again think it's maybe a little bit weird for young people to be like behind a political party so much, and you don't have to have that approach. You can just simply say like, hey, did you know that the Biden-Harris administration passed the very first gun safety bill in 3 decades, in 30 years, which is that hadn't been, that for some presidents who had Democratic majorities in the Senate, right? This is more some nerdy stuff, but that wasn't possible for them. This is possible now because of this administration. And I think a lot of young people just don't know that. I think they don't really know, the $170 billion student debt that has been relieved. They don't know what President Biden is saying on the issue of wanting to codify Roe v. Wade into law. A big misconception I see is a lot of times, we actually heard this on the road this summer, is that a young person came to our event and said, oh, well, Roe v. Wade was overturned under President Biden, so that's his fault. And I'm so sick of Kamala Harris saying she's going to put it back. She's vice president right now. Why can't she just do it right now, right? That is obviously a misunderstanding of how bills are passed and how the government works, right? But I think just it can never hurt to just reiterate the fact that, Donald Trump packed the Supreme Court. the, a conservative Supreme Court to make that happen. I think there's just a big a knowledge gap for a lot of young people. Again, politics is not interesting. It's not fun normally for a lot of young people. I think they're conditioned from a young age to shut that out with their friends. It's not flashy at all to come to your friend group and be like, did you know what President Biden said yesterday? Like, it's not something that young people want to talk about. Anyway, I would reiterate all those things, and I would keep it as an issue-based conversation.
Now we know that there is a ton of disinformation online, and you guys are more social media savvy than my generation. But how do you think some of that, the disinformation, the deep fakes, all that stuff, like how do you think that's impacting young voters, and how do you work to combat that?
So I actually think that young voters are extremely good at identifying misinformation when it's coming from a source. So, like, if they read an article, they're like, that doesn't sound right. The biggest source of disinformation and misinformation for young people in this country is coming from right-wing conservative pundits who are part of what we call the alt-right pipeline. It is predominantly, and this, I know we have another question related to this that has to do with the gender gap. This is why you see such a divide in young men and young women's political ideology in this country, is because a lot of young men have fallen down these algorithms where it starts out with very mild, dark humor. They might see a stand-up comedian who makes a little bit edgy of a joke, and then within a few days, within a few weeks, they have fallen into watching content from people like Andrew Tate. There is someone named Aiden Ross, Sneeko, and it is not a coincidence that a lot of these men who are perpetuating this blatant misogyny, this blatant racism, and just disgusting rhetoric are also the people who Donald Trump is campaigning with. He's going on their podcast, he's going on their streams, and he is talking to their predominantly young male audience. And they are perpetuating misinformation and hateful ideology on their platforms very recklessly. I think that the way that we combat this, number one, is we have to teach young people how to do their own research and how to do it correctly. For me, I learned how to do that when I was a freshman in high school, and I took debate, and I had to learn how to do that. I know a lot of other young people are very quick to fact check types of things. So I think the distinction here is misinformation and disinformation spreads amongst generations differently. I think older generations are more likely to fall for fake articles or these fake graphics or comments, whereas young people are more likely to fall for mis and disinformation that's coming directly from a personality or a public figure who they're following, like these conservative media people. And so I think that that is why it's harder to kind of gauge where young people are, but I think it is extremely reflected in the fact we see so many young men in this country are voting conservative. But thankfully, it's not as successful as they would want it to be. And it's almost kind of like we're seeing an eat their own type of situation, because these men who have been radicalized, some of them are now thinking, well, like, well, the election was stolen and my vote doesn't matter anyway, so I'm not voting. How we got there, I don't know. But I would say if you see your son or your grandchild watching some men on YouTube, if you see them watching Twitch streams, if you see them acting a little bit more aggressively, I would have that conversation immediately. Because once someone falls down that alt-right pipeline and they start to get radicalized, it can be very difficult to get them out of the situation.
Haley,
Yeah.
I see you nodding. Oh, Sam, sorry.
Oh, well, quickly, I just
Okay.
want to say that what Olivia is describing here is probably one of the most significant and facing issues that is posed to us going forward. Like the amount of young men who are watching these Twitch streamers is unbelievable. It really started during COVID when a lot of young people were just in their house, had nothing to do. I watched some of these streams myself. Obviously, I think I'm smart enough to realize when Aiden Ross is saying something like borderline racist and misogynistic that I don't agree with that, but a lot of these young people, like, this is their role model. It's like, every generation has role models, right? And it used to be on TV, and now it's on TikTok, and now it's on Twitch, which is a live streaming platform. But just before Haley talks, there was a YouTube video that came out about It was somebody interviewing school teachers about their grade school, like kindergarten through fifth grade aged young boys in their classrooms who were watching streamers like Aiden Ross and Sneeko, and then who would come into class and say like the most crazy misogynistic things to the teacher and to like the young girls in that class. And they're like just being conditioned to say that. It's not even really their fault. It's the role models they have. I saw someone put in the chat, Joe Rogan. He's another great example of somebody who on the outside looks like he's just a comedian. He's kind of edgy, but like he's actually pushing just straight up like Trumpism to their young audience. And a lot of parents may not even realize that that's what's happening. So really important, really important.
Haley, you were nodding along the whole time, so I wanted to give you a chance
Yeah,
to.
this is a topic I feel really passionately about, but they did a really good job kind of touching on it. But I think more than misinformation, the concern is like an ideological push that's really targeting young men. And so something as like parents you can do is really sort of check what their timeline or their For You page looks like as young people. But me and my like fiance or like our friends will compare our For You pages, and oftentimes we're following the same types of accounts, we're going to the same types of events, having the same kind of conversations, and the men in their early 20s timeline or like feed and videos they're getting fed are filled with this like right-wing ideology. And they're able to like identify that, but younger children really can't. And so being really actively involved and engaged in who your kids are following is so important.
I think another part of this I want to throw in there too is I think this is a really good place of where parents and grandparents can make a difference is modeling the behavior for your kids and grandkids of not living in an echo chamber. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a household where it was just as common for me to watch Fox News as it was for me to watch ABC News with my family. Is exposing us at a younger age to different types of media and different sources of information. So as you get older, you can kind of comprehend like what is more truthful and what is more untruthful. Because I like me myself when I was younger, I kind of fell down this alt-right pipeline, and it started with Joe Rogan, and I eventually got out of it because I'm a woman figures. But I think that parents and grandparents and older, mentors or aunts or whatever, we need to make it clear that it is okay and encouraged to listen to people who have different opinions than we do. And I think that the more that we chip away at these echo chambers and these kinds of politically polarized issues, the better our civic outcomes will be in the long run.
Okay, I want to ask one quick question. I have one more after that, and then we're going to get to Q&A from anybody. So if you are watching and you have questions in the chat, I know Julie's been looking at those, and we will start asking those. So I have a 23-year-old son, so I can no longer control his social media. I can't check his phone. So Sam, I'll start with you. And we know right now there's a huge gender gap in this election. What's your advice for parents, grandparents of maybe the 18-year-old, 20-year-old, 23, 25-year-old young men who we know are being targeted with this? I know you talked about what Olivia just said is great, but like for those of us who have kids out of the house or no longer able to access what they're watching, like how would you just approach those conversations to make sure that they understand they are being targeted for this like alt-right pipeline?
I mean, I think you can just have that conversation and just say like, hey, did you know that this person may be pushing like misinformation? I think the difference now is that we, like the Democratic Party has really, really amazing male role models that weren't really out in the national spotlight like 2 or 3 months ago. Like somebody like Tim Walz, somebody like Doug Emhoff. These are like really, really great, impressive examples of how men should be and how they should uplift the women in their lives. And when we look at the other side, it is literally just misogyny. Like they're not even hiding it. Olivia mentioned Andrew Tate. I think a lot of those people that you mentioned, these 18 to 23 or 26-year-olds, will absolutely know who he is, and they'll probably watch him and maybe like unconsciously be internalizing some of that misogyny. But I think just starting those conversations with like, hey, like, what do you think of Andrew Tate, and go from there. And then maybe, what do you think of Tim Walz? Or did you see, like, just show them Doug's speech at the DNC. That was one of the most incredible displays of men uplifting women in a way that I don't think is like preachy, or it's just so natural and real. And I think that going forward, those two people specifically, people like Gavin Newsom, people like Josh Shapiro, all these other really, really great, I think, male role models are going to be people for young men to look at going forward. And they're going to be more important as we have to start battling more and more of these insane, I guess, I think the dangerous part here is that the Trump campaign has identified the fact that young men are getting exposed to this stuff. And as Olivia said, they're now getting on their streams. Like, Aiden Ross is a Twitch streamer. He has one of the largest platforms. I mean, he consistently has hundreds of thousands of live viewers watching every single one of his live streams. And at first, he was just doing video games. Like, this game called NBA 2K, where it's a basketball game, harmless, completely normal. Now he's on his stream saying Trump 2024, sleepy Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is how he says it. He's just out there spewing MAGA Trumpism. And it, like, I think for a lot of these young people, they're not going to be able to separate the fact that this might be like political misinformation. They're not going to be able to do that. So just, I think, have these conversations, start asking them what they think, and give them great examples with male role models. Doug Emhoff and Tim Walz are great places to start.
Haley, anything you want to add in terms of like the gender gap we're seeing and how to address that with like the younger men in our lives?
Yeah, well, I love everything Sam said about identifying good male role models. It's been so inspiring to see that emerge in the Democratic Party in a way we haven't. But the other would be that I encourage people to get online. Like, that is how young people are getting their news. And for me, being able to talk to my mom, who recently started in the last like year, following people on TikTok, wanting to get involved because she knows that's how her and I have two younger sisters are consuming our news, can recommend people that she thinks are positive people for us to follow or to have a conversation around, and then can follow and sort of tune into the people maybe I've talked about, and you can have a dialogue that way around, oh, well, I followed the person you talked about, and I saw like, I didn't love what he was talking about, like, let's talk about it. Or maybe you should be following this man instead, or this person instead. That's a great role model. And I think leaning in and accepting that this is where young people are getting their news, and like, our parents used to watch the news at night with their parents, that, and then have conversations, is watch where we're getting our news and have conversations with us about those people, and kind of help guide us in the right direction that way.
Okay, well, that leads right into my final question. I will let Olivia say whatever she wants about the gender gap piece of it, but my final question, because as parents, I want to do just that. Like, I want to know, who should I be watching to learn, and who should I be like mentioning to my kids, like, you should really, beside the three of you, obviously, like, who else should they be following online? Who should we be following online?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of really great political accounts out there that I think would work really well for young people. So for young women in particular, I think the feminist account is a really great place to get information. I think So Informed is another one. When it comes to individuals, unfortunately, there are a lot of young men who make political content. Like, there's, Harry Sisson, Chris Mowry, Aaron Parnas, Isaiah Martin. And there are not really a lot of young women in this space who have very large platforms. I'm sure you can imagine as to why that is. But there's myself and Haley, there's Deja Fox. Oh my gosh, I'm already blanking, Haley, so I'll pass it over to you. But as far as the gender gap goes, I'm actually going to give what might be an unproductive answer. And this comes from me. Context, I had foster brothers from the ages of 12 to 15. I was the youngest of 11 children, 8 teenage boys who were all older than me. And what I will say is this: sometimes, in order to get a young man to listen to you, you have to talk to them like you are a young man. And there is an attitude and a type of language sometimes that is all they're responsive to. Me and my brother have gone back and forth for years over politics because he is a Republican, he is a conservative, he supports Trump. And the only time that I have ever gotten my brother to eagerly listen to what I had to say is when I told him to shut up and stop being such a loser. Because that's loser talk. You sound like a loser. You sound like an insecure, small little man. Now, are you going to let me say what I need to say, or are you going to keep whining? That seemed to work. So, depending on your situation, sometimes you might just need to talk to them how they would talk to you or how they would talk to someone else. So, that's my piece.
Okay, Sam, for you, any influencers online we should be following, we should be recommending, or young people in our life follow?
Oh my God, there's a lot. I think Olivia named a lot of the male influencers like Harry Sisson and Chris Mowry and Isaiah Martin. Some of the other female influencers that I really respect, Mia Tretta, who is a survivor of gun violence. Unfortunately, she was actually shot by a bullet and thankfully survived. But she's now gone on to be a really, really great, advocate for not only gun violence prevention policies, but just the whole spectrum. Shannon Watts, who I'm sure a lot of you know, I don't think she's Gen Z, but she's a really, really prominent female voice in, I guess, the influencer world. I want to pass it to Haley though, because I'm sure she's going to have a lot more suggestions.
I'm happy to send Julie a list, but I did open up my phone when this question got mentioned, and some women that I think are amazing are Jessica Jordan Ping, Raven, oh my gosh. Uh, I'll send you a list. There's so many incredible women out there that I do think need help bolstering their platform, but then also I think adding to the feminist and so impact those types of platforms is Betches, which I think Betches News does a really good job connecting pop culture moments with politics and making it really sort of trendy and memeable for women to talk about political issues, especially young women. So I think that's a really good place to start to make your conversations maybe really relate to your younger children.
I'm going to bring up Julie Collins because I have not been following the chat, but I guarantee there are a lot of questions in the chat. So I'm assuming I'm correct.
Indeed, there are, and they have answered some of them. You all have. Someone asked specifically about male role models, and then someone else asked about for minority youth and for LGBTQIA plus youth.
Latino men, Carlos Espinosa. He is absolutely phenomenal, and he makes almost all of his content in Spanish with English subtitles. So it's also very accessible for different generations. Josh and Isaiah Martin are both really great when it comes to talking about the issues that Black men are facing.
Perfect. Also, someone asked about trusted news sources. What are your trusted news sources? We talk about this a lot, but I'm interested to hear what you all.
This also doubles as some I think reputable male role models is the podcast Pod Save America. I think they do a phenomenal job of presenting news and analysis to not to young people, just to everyone. But they also do a really great job of making it fun and interesting, which I think is kind of like the secret sauce to getting young people interested and involved in politics. I don't think we talked about enough is the need and desire by young people to have politics be presented in a way that's fun and exciting and fresh instead of just like throwing statistics at them. I would really, really recommend Pod Save America. They do a phenomenal job. The podcast episodes they do are usually pretty short, like an hour, 15, hour, 20 minutes. Haley was actually just on one of Crooked Media's, which runs Pod Save America. She was just on Stacey Abrams, I think, second episode of her new podcast, which is just huge. And I listened to it, and that's another great podcast that I'm sure will be getting out there more and more. But I would really recommend just for male role models, listen to Pod Save America. They do a phenomenal job.
All right, that's perfect. What's one thing not to say to young voters?
Don't tell young people that they're wrong for having a certain opinion. Like, for example, I'm sure we've all seen the issue of the Middle East come up. Don't tell them that you're wrong for having that grievance or that opinion. Instead, you could say things like, hey, who would you rather organize under? Which political candidate would you rather be organizing for, something on the Middle East? Which candidate would you rather have elected currently? I think that's a better way to answer that.
I would say something that drives me nuts is when I have older people tell me the young people are going to save us. And then when I express an opinion they don't agree with, you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about. Don't ever tell me that I'm too young to understand an issue because I'm not too young to deal with the political consequences of elections where y'all got to vote. So don't tell me I'm too young to understand an issue. That's a huge pet peeve of mine. I know it drives other young people crazy too.
Haley, you want to weigh in?
I was going to say similar to Olivia, just that our opinions will change when we get older. We don't have the right life experience to understand where you're coming from. I think that can really turn young people off and make it feel like you don't want us to be engaged.
Someone asked, I thought this was an interesting question. Will young people get involved with groups like League for Women Voters, or are peer-led groups better?
I'll jump in, but I think that there's a place for those more institutional organizations and like the intergenerational component that we talked about and how important it is. But in order to attract young people, you need to change the way that you're doing events to attract young people. Like I think especially young people who are interested in getting involved in politics, they want to be part of those organizations, but you need to change your organizing efforts to involve us and make us feel like it's worthy, or not worthy, I didn't mean it that way, but to make us feel like you want us to be part of the organization.
All right, that's good. Does character matter?
I saw this question and immediately I knew what direction I wanted to go into you with this. I will give an example. Character matters to me in terms of like, are you treating people with kindness? If you are voting for women and you support their freedom to choose, you support the Affordable Care Act, you support all those things, I don't care what you're doing in your personal life. As long as you're not voting against my rights and you're not treating people horribly, what you do in your spare time is your business. That ain't got nothing to do with me. It ain't got nothing to do with my constitutional rights. And I feel more and more that's how more and more young people are feeling, is if it's not going to hurt anybody, it's not going to hurt these large communities, I don't care. I don't care.
Well, I think if I can add to that, I think it goes back to what we were talking about, that young people are more values-based than party-based or person-based. I think a lot about like the Trump rallies is a good comparison to this, is that we hear about like the Trump rallies and the way that people get so excited to go to a rally, and young people were not like going to a rally for a candidate. When I hear of my friend saying I'm going to a rally, my thought is, oh, for what? For gun violence, for reproductive rights? Like what are you showing up for? What is the rally? It's not, my head doesn't go to a person. And so it's more about the values of a candidate than rallying behind a person, which for me is like the character question. And that's why we're like not culty like other parties.
Okay, so there are, I don't know, 4 or 5 derivatives of kind of 2 different questions. So I'm going to try to condense this down. And honestly, you have answered some of this, but just to kind of make sure that we kind of hit all the points. So basically, I think folks are, and personally, I think this is the wrong approach, but I'm anxious to hear what you have to say, are wanting to know, how do they convey the importance of either restoring the healthy democracy, or how do you discuss with somebody who says they don't get into that stuff, or they don't vote, or they're not into politics? These are to me like some of the same kind of questions, or both parties don't do anything for young people. What what are the ways to kind of, and I know that's somewhat separate, but really not. There's at the end of the day, folks are wanting to start conversations with folks who seem disengaged. So basically, I think it's, how do you get folks engaged, young folks engaged?
I could answer the first one. I could talk for 30 minutes on everything about what you just said, but specifically on the issue of why is it important to get involved? I forget the exact question, but something about democracy. And we went on a tour called Tour to Save Democracy. So I think I know a little bit about why it's so important to just maintain a democracy, right? Obviously, for us in this call, I think we know why that's so important. But for any young person who doesn't say that, all of the issues that they may care about in their lives, whether it might be abortion rights, whether it might be voting rights, or building more housing, or gun violence prevention laws, or climate reform, literally name an issue, and that won't be possible under some type of Project 2025 Donald Trump dictatorial government, where he would pack the Supreme Court even more than it is right now, or he would replace civil servants with 50,000 Trump loyalists. That none of these laws that we want so much, like end to the electoral college, or ending gerrymandering, or any of these things that we want, all these progressive values, they just won't be able to happen if we don't have some form of a democracy right now. I mean, I think that's the biggest takeaway. Is I think sometimes we kind of forget that, like, there are things that we must do that aren't also advocating for the issues. And I think sometimes advocating for our democracy gets left out of the picture sometimes. And to me, that's kind of the most important thing. It's like the building block for all of these other super important issues that we need to have passed so desperately. But that's just on that issue. I'll let Olivia or Haley answer the other ones if they'd like.
Um, I'll add something really quick and then Olivia, hand it over to you. But for me, I think when it's about making it really palpable. So my first experience with politics was when I was like 7 years old or 8 years old. I was in elementary school. I was really upset about something going on in my school, and my mom told me to write a letter to the school board who was in charge of this, and then took me to a school board meeting and had me read it to them during the like public comments. And for me, it helped me really dive in a really naive, really young way that like these people were the people making this decision about my school. And I find having conversations with young people who are like my friends or peers who aren't sure if they want to get involved is to find some member of their community, someone running for mayor or school board or like sheriff or whatever it is, that is really palpable to them, the experience, or like that person, that candidate, and get them excited to vote about someone on your ballot so that they're motivated to turn out. Like, know the woman down the street who's running because her child died from gun violence, or because she's running against a Moms for Liberty candidate who is taking away the ability for LGBTQ students to feel like comfortable in schools, and as palpable and like real as you can make it feel for someone. And that doesn't happen on the national level. That's like taking the time to explain the community element. It's really hard to turn away once you feel that connection.
Exactly what Haley said about local candidates. My most rewarding experiences I have ever had is this past election here in Houston. We primaried out two bad candidates and they lost their elections. That was a victory. I helped on those campaigns. And that was extremely rewarding. So getting involved locally is a huge deal. As far as it comes from more federally things, I always go back to abortion storytelling. I can't tell you how many young friends of mine who have said they don't care about politics, who once I have told them about Kate Cox and Amanda Zerwoski here in Texas, their stories of how both of them had the government intervene and straight up tell them you're not near death enough for you to get health care, and have them understand the severity of Texas's law about there are no exceptions. You think you're going to be the exception? You're not. And that has moved a lot of people, is understanding how extreme these laws actually are, to the point of it's not a hypothetical that people are dying. People are dying because of these laws. And we can fix this. We can fix this year if we get involved. And those are the stories that I find to be the most effective when it comes to getting young people who feel disillusioned involved.
We have gone 4 minutes over. This has been wonderful. I hope you guys will come back. I'm going to kick it back over to Julie, but thank you. There are still questions I know folks had, but we've run out of time.
I just want to again say thank you so much to our three panelists, to Sam and Haley and Olivia, for joining us. I think this was so informative. I actually learned so much, and I'm actually excited to have some conversations with my adult voting children. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all that you guys are doing in this election. It's phenomenal. and really, really happy to be in this fight with you. So everybody have a great evening.
I also learned a lot from Haley and Olivia. So thank you guys.
Thank you all. It's always a
All right.
pleasure.
Have a good night. Good luck at school.